Lucien Duval did not attend parties. He hosted them decadent candlelit soirees in the 1800s, where violinists played until dawn and the guests never quite remembered how they got home. But a modern, suburban Halloween party? With sticky floors and children dressed as superheroes? That was beneath him, and yet, here he was, standing at the end of a driveway lined with plastic skeletons and flickering pumpkin lights, clutching a black envelope. He glanced down at the cursive scrawl. "To our mysterious new neighbor, please join us for tricks, treats, and Halloween fun." The letter had been slipped under his door that morning. His first instinct was to burn it. His second was to throw it in the trash. His third was curiosity. Lucien's mind was a cathedral of grudges and impeccable manners, and one rule echoed through it. Never decline an invitation from a mortal. It drew suspicion. Suspicion drew stakes. So here he was, on a brisk October night, adjusting his dark velvet coat, and trying not to breathe in the smell of cheap fog machine juice wafting from the garage. He had just reached for the front door when it flung open. "Hey, Mr. Dracula," a freckle-faced boy in a werewolf hoodie grinned up at him. "You made it. Mom said to give you this." The boy shoved a paper plate into Lucien's hands. It was piled with candy corn. Lucien froze. The colors, the smell, his senses recoiled as if someone had handed him a dead rat dipped in perfume. "What is this?" Lucien asked, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "It's candy corn," the boy said, already darting away toward a table of cupcakes. "Best Halloween candy ever." Lucien stared at the plate. The triangular pieces glistened under the string lights, each one an unnatural blend of orange, yellow, and white. They smelled faintly of wax and artificial joy. Somewhere deep in his memory, he recalled an unfortunate evening in 1954 involving a harvest festival, an unwise wager, and 3 pounds of the stuff. The sugar rush alone had nearly put him in a coffin for a week. A woman in a witch hat bustled over. "Hi there, you must be Lucien. Come in, come in. Don't just hover at the doorway like a spooky statue." She ushered him inside before he could protest. The living room was a chaos of costumed children, glittering decorations, and a playlist blaring, Monster Mash, at an offensively high volume. Lucien's grip tightened on the plate. The candy corn seemed to mock him. From across the room, a toddler in a bat costume spotted him. Her eyes lit up. "Dracula," she shrieked, charging toward him at a speed that defied her stubby legs. Lucien sighed. This was going to be a long night. Lucien had mastered many arts over the centuries. Persuasion, shadow stepping, memorizing an entire book in a single read. But weaving through a suburban living room without being tackled by sugar-fueled children was proving to be his most dangerous challenge yet. The toddler in the bat costume slammed into his leg, giggling maniacally. "Bite me, Dracula," she squealed. Lucien blinked down at her. "That is not how it works," he said, stepping delicately sideways, narrowly avoiding a paper cup of purple punch sloshing from a pirate's hand. Everywhere he looked, there were bowls of candy. Mini chocolate bars, gummy worms, and, to his absolute horror, more candy corn. It sat in glass dishes, it filled little plastic pumpkin buckets, it was even stuck on toothpicks like bizarre cocktail appetizers. It was a trap, he was certain of it now. A werewolf teen leaned against the wall, munching candy corn by the fistful. "You gotta try it, man," he said through a mouthful of orange and yellow. "It's like the ultimate Halloween food." Lucien forced a thin smile. "I have dietary restrictions." "Oh, vegan?" Lucien considered explaining that he was a nocturnal apex predator who drank only one particular fluid, but decided against it. "Something like that." Before the teen could respond, the witch-hatted hostess appeared again. "Lucien, we're about to do the candy corn contest. Everyone has to participate. It's tradition." Lucien's spine went cold. "Contest? Oh yes," she chirped. "We see who can eat the most candy corn in 1 minute." Around the room, the crowd cheered. Tables were cleared, timers readied. Someone shoved a folding chair at him. Lucien felt his centuries of composure cracking. He had fought werewolves, evaded inquisitors, danced with duchesses, but he had never faced anything like this. "You'll do great," the hostess said, plopping down a heaping bowl of candy corn in front of him. "Ready, set." The timer beeped. Lucien stared at the waxy, tricolored mound, the smell clawing at his nose. Children chanted his name, cameras flashed, his every instinct screamed to flee, to vanish into the night, but there was no polite escape now. The first piece touched his tongue, and that was when things truly began to go wrong. The first piece of candy corn melted on Lucien's tongue like sweetened chalk. He winced, but then something pulsed. It wasn't just sugar, It was magic, ancient, thrumming magic that clawed into his veins and made the hairs on his neck rise. Lucien froze mid-bite, ignoring the crowd chanting, "Eat, eat, eat." The room seemed to warp, the laughter dropping an octave too low, the string lights overhead flickering with a sickly orange glow. He tasted more than sugar now. He tasted iron, moonlight, and something disturbingly familiar. A binding spell. "Oh no," he muttered. "Oh yes," the witch-hatted hostess whispered, leaning close so only he could hear. "You've been stealing our town's blood supply for years, Count Lucien. Did you think we wouldn't notice?" Lucien's eyes widened. "What? Candy corn's perfect for it," she said, smiling far too sweetly. "The waxy coating hides the herbs. The sugar masks the taste of wolfsbane, nightshade, and just a pinch of powdered holy relic." Lucien dropped the candy corn like it had burned him, but it was too late. A strange heat spread through his limbs, heavy and slow. His vision shimmered, the smell of the party. Punch, fake cobwebs, sweat. It was drowned out by the thick scent of rosemary and ash. The hostess straightened, speaking louder now for the crowd. "One more bite, and you'll be ours until next Halloween." The children giggled like they were in on the joke. The werewolf teen leaned against the wall, grinning with far too many teeth. Lucien stood, unsteady, his centuries-old instincts screaming for him to get out. But every door seemed impossibly far away, every shadow oddly shallow. From somewhere behind the crowd, a voice called, "Eat it, vampire." Lucien's fangs itched, not from hunger, but from fear. Lucien scanned the faces in the crowd. Too many smiles, too many people enjoying this far too much. But then he spotted her. At the back of the room, leaning casually against the snack table was Marigold, the town's beloved little old candy shop owner. Her hair was a perfect white puff, her cardigan soft pink, her eyes hidden behind thick glasses. But her smile was sharp. She popped a candy corn into her mouth and chewed slowly, like she was savoring more than just sugar. "Marigold," Lucien said, voice low and dangerous. "You, oh, me, darling?" she said sweetly, pushing through the crowd. "I run the candy shop. I'm supposed to hand out treats. You've been putting binding spells in your candy." Her laugh was light, but her eyes glinted cold. "Of course I have. It's the only way to keep predators like you on a leash. You think you're the first vampire to wander into my little town? I've been at this for 70 years. The crowd murmured. Even the witch-hatted hostess stepped back a little. Lucien's lips curled into a snarl. "You're a hunter." "Oh no, dear." She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a purr. "I'm a collector." Before Lucien could respond, she clapped her hands. The walls shifted, actually shifted, and he realized they weren't in a house anymore. They were in the back room of her shop. Lined with jars, jars full of shadows, jars that moved, some whispered, some hissed, some rattled the glass, eyes glinting in the dark. "I keep them all," Marigold said, brushing a wrinkled hand over one jar. "Just enough magic in the candy to trap them until I need favors." And then she smiled again. "Too wide this time. You, Count Lucien, will be my finest piece yet." Lucien's eyes darted to the nearest jar. Inside, a swirling mass of red mist coiled and twisted. Something old, something hungry. If Marigold had collected that, she wasn't just a candy shop owner. She was a sorceress on a whole different level. But he wasn't helpless. "I'll give you one chance," he said, his voice low enough that the candy in her dish began to quiver. "Let me go." Marigold only tilted her head, like a grandmother humoring a child. "And why would I do that, dear? You walked right into my trap." Lucien smirked. "True, but you've forgotten something important about vampires." He raised one hand to his mouth and bit into his palm. Thick, dark blood welled up, and as it hit the floor, it hissed like acid. Marigold's eyes widened. Oh, clever boy. Vampire blood wasn't just a weakness to mortals. It was a conduit, and Lucien knew the old ways. He flung his palm outward, sending droplets across the floor in a jagged circle. The air shimmered, sugar in the walls beginning to crystallize, sharp points forming like blades of amber. Marigold hissed, "You'll crack my jars." "That's the idea." The floor trembled. A jar nearby shattered, releasing a shadowy creature with a hiss like tearing silk. It lunged, not at Lucien, but at Marigold. Her sweet smile dropped. "No, get back." But the thing swirled around her legs, whispering curses in a language no human throat could form. More jars burst, releasing shrieking, half-formed monsters into the room. Lucien stepped toward her, the blood circle pulsing like a heartbeat. "You collected them, Marigold. Now they've come for you." She turned on him, eyes blazing. I can still bind you. But he was already gone, dissolving into smoke, slipping through the crack in the shop's door. Behind him, the screams began. Lucien reformed in the alley, leaning against the damp brick wall. His chest heaved, not from exhaustion, but from the rush of magic still sparking through his veins. The cool October air carried the scent of sugar, dust, and ash. He smirked. She had it coming. Then, he heard it. A low hum, like a swarm of bees, but wetter, thicker. It rolled out of the shop's open doorway in waves. The glass in the windows quivered. Lucien's smirk faltered. From inside, something heavy thudded against the floor. Then another. The shadows that poured out weren't like the ones he'd seen in the jars. They were bigger, their edges blurring, their forms shifting as if they couldn't decide what they wanted to be. One of them slid into the streetlight, and Lucien's gut turned cold. It wore part of Marigold's face. Not her whole head, just an uncanny, mask-like patch of skin that moved when it shouldn't. Her left eye blinked, slow and sticky, staring directly at him. More followed, shambling into the alley, dragging sugar-slick claws across the pavement. Their bodies glistened as though they were made of molten candy, and where they stepped, the cobblestones began to dissolve. Lucien backed away. "Oh, that's bad," one of the creatures hissed. A noise halfway between steam escaping a kettle and a laugh, and the air filled with the cloying smell of burnt caramel. His head swam, every instinct screamed run, but behind them, through the haze, he saw the truth. The shop wasn't just releasing these things. It was growing. The walls stretched higher, candy-colored vines curling outward, pulling in brick, metal, and stone. The entire block began to sweeten and rot at the same time. Lucien gritted his teeth. He'd been so focused on escaping Marigold's trap, he hadn't realized she'd been guarding something far worse. And now it was free. Lucien swore under his breath. It would have been so easy. Just vanish into the night, pretend none of this was his problem. But those candy-coated abominations weren't going to stop with one alley. And the last thing he needed was a supernatural infestation that could rot an entire city block following him back to his lair. The nearest creature lunged. Lucien twisted aside, coat whipping around him, and flung a handful of silver sugar tongs from his pocket. They spun mid-air, glowing with a quick incantation before snapping shut on the monster's throat. The thing shrieked, melting into a syrupy puddle that bubbled like tar. He grimaced. One down, too many left. His mind raced through spells. Most of them designed to destroy, but this wasn't just destruction. It was hunger with teeth. He'd need something bigger. Lucien pressed his palm to the damp brick wall, muttering in a dead dialect. The mortar split, revealing a hollow space stuffed with the brittle remnants of past wards. He pulled out a bundle of black licorice rope, stiff and cracked from decades of neglect. Perfect. He looped it into a figure eight, biting the end until his fangs drew blood. The licorice absorbed it instantly, writhing in his hands like a living thing. The swarm closed in. That awful burnt caramel smell filled his lungs. Lucien hurled the rope at the ground. It hit with a wet slap, then uncoiled into a jagged spiral. One that began dragging the creatures inward like the pull of a whirlpool. They fought. Gods, they fought, screaming, stretching, their forms breaking apart in sprays of syrup and shards of sugar glass. The spiral drank them down, slurping the last one into its inky center before knotting itself tight and snapping into dust. The alley was quiet, too quiet. Lucien stood still, chest rising and falling. Then he heard the scrape. From deep, the door to the candy shop hung crooked on its hinges, one corner scraping the floor with a sound like teeth on porcelain. Lucien stepped over the puddles of what used to be the swarm, his boots sticking slightly to the sugary residue. The air inside was worse. Thick, cloying, and humid, like being trapped in a cotton candy machine that had gone rancid. The shop was an explosion of color faded by dust. Jars lined the walls, their glass cloudy, contents long congealed. Lollipops fused into a single rainbow lump, jelly beans dulled to pebble gray. And in the far corner, the display case. Its glass cracked, held shapes that shouldn't have been there. He could hear it now. That slow, wet shuffle. Lucien's hand hovered over the nearest jar. Inside were teeth, not candy teeth, real teeth. They clinked faintly as he moved past. The shuffle stopped. Something crouched behind the counter. He could see its outline in the glow of the shop's single flickering bulb. Too tall to be human, too angular to be harmless. Its limbs twitched like it wasn't used to wearing them. Lucien took a step closer. The thing inhaled sharply, the sound crackling like cellophane. "You've been feeding them," Lucien said quietly. A laugh answered him, thin, high, and brittle as sugar glass cracking. The figure rose, and as it straightened, its head scraped the ceiling. Its face was a smooth oval of hard candy, a swirl of red and white like a peppermint but stretched over something with jaws far too wide. The peppermint split, revealing teeth. Rows of them. Hungry? It asked. Lucien didn't bother answering. He launched himself over the counter, boots slamming into the creature's candy-coated chest. The peppermint shell cracked like porcelain, splintering into sharp shards that cut his coat as they burst outward. The thing shrieked, high and keening, like steam escaping a kettle, and swung a long, sticky arm toward him. Lucien ducked, feeling strands of hardened caramel whip past his ear. He drew the iron stake from his belt, its tip still sticky from the swarm earlier, and jammed it upward beneath the monster's jaw. The brittle shell gave way with a satisfying crunch. It staggered, clutching its face, shards raining down like razor-edged snowflakes. Lucien pressed the attack. He slammed it against the wall, jars tumbling and shattering around them, spilling gumdrops and jawbreakers across the floor. The creature's hands scrabbled at his throat, candy coating flaking off in wet chunks to reveal meat. It wasn't candy all the way through. That made it worse. Die already, Lucien hissed, driving the stake deeper. With a sound like a taffy pull snapping in half, the thing collapsed in a heap. Its candy mask split entirely, revealing a face that was human once. Now melted and stretched in ways that made Lucien's stomach turn. The body convulsed once, twice, then stilled. He thought it was over until the jars began to rattle. All of them. From within, the candies, every piece, started to move. Lucien didn't hesitate. He stepped back, slow at first, then faster. Boots crunching over gumdrops as he kept his eyes on the rattling shelves. The sound was getting louder, more frantic, like 1,000 tiny fists pounding against glass. One jar cracked, a hairline fracture spider webbed down the side, sugar dust puffing into the air. The scent hit him, sweet, cloying, almost intoxicating. He pulled his scarf up over his nose and backed toward the door. Another jar split, jelly beans writhing inside like trapped beetles. A third toppled, shattering across the floor in a spray of glass and candy that immediately began to crawl toward him. Lucien's pulse spiked. He shoved the door open, bells jangling wildly, and burst out into the cold night air. Behind him, the noise swelled, glass breaking, candies thudding to the floor, the frantic scrape of sugar-coated bodies dragging themselves free. He didn't stop moving until he reached the alley's mouth. When he finally looked back, the shop's windows were fogged with condensation from inside, and something was pressing against the glass. Multiple somethings, and they were smiling. Lucien dropped his scarf and squared his shoulders. The night air was sharp, but the cold did nothing to settle the adrenaline crackling in his veins. He took one deliberate step back toward the candy shop door, just enough to make the bells jingle again. The glass door didn't swing open. It exploded outward. Shards rained down as a wave of candy spilled into the street, clattering over cobblestones. The jelly beans moved first, rolling, hopping, their glossy shells reflecting the street lamp glow like insect eyes. Behind them, the candy corn came. Bright, triangular, and unnervingly fast, clicking like tiny bones on the pavement. Lucien unsheathed his silver-edged dagger and drew a circle in the air. Pale light shimmered, forming a ward that sizzled when the first jellybean touched it. The candy hissed. Yes, hissed. From the broken doorway stepped a figure in a tattered apron. Its skin pale as fondant, eyes molten caramel. Its grin was jagged peppermint. "You should have left, sweet thing," it said, voice sticky and slow. "Now you'll feed my little ones." Lucien's grip tightened. "I don't think so." The candy swarm surged, the vampire lunged and the street became a blur of sugar, silver, and sparks. Lucien slammed his palm against the air, and the ward circle exploded outward like a shattered snow globe. Only instead of snow, tiny shimmering sugar crystals burst into the street. The vampire hissed, shielding its eyes, but the sugar landed on the jellybean swarm like acid, melting candy shells into bubbling puddles. The smell of burnt fruit and caramel filled the night. Lucien spun the dagger in his hand and whispered a spell older than chocolate itself. The silver blade elongated into a candy cane staff, swirling red and white, humming with raw enchantment. He drove it into the ground. The cobblestones cracked, and from the fissures erupted molten fudge, flowing like lava down Sweet Street. Gummy bears, now the size of wolves, leapt from the shadows to block the vampire's escape. Their eyes glowed an eerie cherry red. The vampire roared, summoning a whirlwind of licorice whips that lashed at Lucien. He answered by conjuring giant peppermint discs that spun like saw blades, slicing the licorice into harmless ribbons. Your tricks are as cheap as penny candy, the vampire snarled. Lucien smiled. Then let's go full deluxe. With a flick of his wrist, he called down a rain of jawbreakers the size of cannonballs, smashing into the candy horde with deafening cracks. The streetlights flickered under the sheer force of the magic. Somewhere, a church bell tolled midnight, and in the silence between strikes, the vampire's grin faltered. The air itself trembled as Lucien raised the candy cane staff one last time. The peppermint spirals spun faster. So fast they blurred into pure light. Every candy creation he'd summoned, gummy wolves, peppermint saws, molten fudge, froze mid-battle, turning their glowing eyes toward him as if awaiting orders. The vampire hissed, fangs bared, shadow stretching unnaturally behind it. You can't kill me with sugar, it spat. I've walked this earth for 600 years. Lucien slammed the staff into the cobblestones. Boom! A shockwave of pure sweetness erupted outward, turning the very night sky into a swirling vortex of cotton candy clouds and stardust sprinkles. The ground cracked into crystalline sugar formations, refracting rainbow light. The gummy wolves howled, leaping toward the vampire, not to bite, but to drag it toward the vortex. Peppermint discs whirled around the creature, slicing away shadows like peeling an onion, until only the pale, snarling form remained. Too sweet for you? Lucien asked, voice calm over the storm. The vortex's pull grew stronger, sucking in every last jawbreaker, licorice whip, and candy shard until the vampire itself was lifted from the ground, screaming. Its body crystallized mid-air, sugar coating crawling over its skin until it was frozen solid in a perfect candy shell. With a final crack, the vampire shattered into thousands of glittering shards, each one transforming into harmless pieces of candy corn before raining back down to the cobblestones. Lucien lowered his staff. The vortex faded, leaving the street eerily calm, the only sound the faint plink-plink of candy corn bouncing into gutters. He picked one up, eyed it suspiciously, and popped it into his mouth. Almost instantly, his face twisted in disgust. I hate candy corn, he muttered, spitting it out. If you had fun on this adventure, don't ghost me. Hit that like button. And if you never want to miss what happens next, subscribe and ring the bell. Unlike candy corn, you won't regret it.